There is a person who cries in sujood, real tears, not performance. The forehead is on the ground, the hands are open, and something breaks inside the chest, something that has been held tightly for too long, and it releases. And in that moment, the person makes a promise, a genuine one, not the kind you make carelessly. A promise made from the deepest part of the self. I will not do that thing again. I will change. This time is real, and they mean it completely. 2 hours later, they are doing the exact thing they promised they would stop. Not because the prayer wasn't real, not because the tears were fake, not because they are a hypocrite or a liar or a person without sincerity. The tears were real. The promise was real. The feeling was real. And it changed nothing. Now here is the part that no one asks about. All because most people stop at the failure. They see the gap between the sujood and the behavior and they say, weak, undisciplined, not serious enough. And then they add more guilt, more remorse, more intensity in the next prayer, more tears, more promises. And the same thing happens again. Same sujood, same tears, same promise, same 2 hours, same behavior. If this were simply weakness, the tears would not be real. If this were simply a lack of care, the person would not keep returning to that position on the ground, would not keep opening their hands, would not keep feeling something break inside them. The tears are real. The promise is real. The return to the behavior is real. All three of these things are happening simultaneously, in the same person, in the same life. And they are not contradicting each other. They are working together. Yes, this is what I want to show you tonight. Not why you fail, not how to try harder, but why the most sincere version of your remorse, the version that brings tears, that breaks something open, that feels like it should be enough, is operating inside a system that was designed to keep you exactly where you are. The system has a name, but before I give it a name, I want to show you how it works. Because once you see it working, you cannot unsee it. There is something that happens right before you fall asleep on certain nights. When the room is too quiet and the distractions have finally run out, something rises in you, not a thought, more like a pressure, not quite pain, not quite sadness, but close to both. It is guilt. Not guilt about something simple. This guilt is older than today. It is guilt about the same things, the same patterns, the same version of yourself that keeps showing up no matter how many times you said it would be different. And somewhere underneath all of it, there is a question you do not want to say out loud. Why do I keep feeling guilty about the same things and never actually changing? Most people answer this wrong. They say, willpower, discipline, try harder. But the guilt keeps coming back not because you are weak. The guilt keeps coming back because it has a function inside you that was never addressed. It exists inside a system, a closed loop. And until you understand the system, the guilt will keep circling and you will keep mistaking the circle for a straight line. There is a system inside you that is older than your thoughts. It was running before you were aware of it. The scholars who studied the human being most carefully gave this system names. They called its parts the Nafs, the Qalb, and the Ruh. These are not merely religious words. They are maps, descriptions of what is literally happening inside you right now. So let us begin. Not with guilt. Not yet. Let us begin with desire. There is something you wanted. Maybe a habit you wanted to build. Maybe a person you wanted to become. Maybe a level of worship you wanted to reach. A relationship with Allah you wanted to deepen. A version of your daily life that felt clean and purposeful. You saw that version. You felt it. For a moment, it felt close enough to touch. And in that moment, something moved inside you. A genuine urge, a real want, a pull toward something better. That feeling was real. And then it didn't happen. Oh, not because you decided not to change, not because you sat down and said, I have thought about this carefully and I have decided to remain exactly as I am. Nothing that deliberate happened. Life continued. The moment passed. The feeling faded and you found yourself doing the old thing again, being the old version again, without ever really choosing it. And then the guilt arrived. This sequence, the desire to change, the failure to change, the guilt, feels like a flaw in your character. But it is not a problem, not primarily. It is a signal that something much deeper is happening. And until you read the signal correctly, you will keep trying to fix the symptom while the cause remains untouched. The cause lives in the Nafs. The Nafs is not evil. This is the first thing people misunderstand. The Nafs is the self, the part of you that experiences existence, that feels, that wants, that resists. It is the part of you that is most immediately you. And it has a nature, specific, observable, predictable. The Nafs, at its lowest level, what the tradition calls Nafs al-Amara, the commanding self, does not care about what is good for you in the long run. It cares about what is comfortable right now, what is familiar right now, what feels safe right now. This is not a moral failing. The Nafs is built for survival, for immediate feedback, for the reduction of discomfort. But you do not live in a world where survival requires immediate responses anymore. You live in a world where the most important things require delayed gratification, consistent effort, and the willingness to remain uncomfortable for extended periods. And your Nafs was not built for that. Your Nafs was built for now, for fast relief, for the path of least resistance. This is why you feel the desire to change and then don't. This is why you sit in Fajr Salah and feel deeply moved and think, yes, this is the life I want. And then by noon, you are back in old patterns. The Nafs does not surrender its comfort simply because you felt something. Feeling is not enough to override a system. But here is what people miss. The Nafs does something much more sophisticated than simply resisting change. If the Nafs simply refused, you would know there was a battle. But the Nafs is not that simple. It lets you feel the guilt. It not only lets you feel it, it encourages it. It promotes the guilt. It holds the guilt up like a trophy. Because guilt, for the Nafs, is the perfect substitute for change. Guilt feels like you're doing something about the problem. Guilt feels like progress. Guilt feels like you're taking it seriously. The Nafs says, look, we acknowledged it. We felt bad about it. We are clearly not comfortable with it. And because you felt bad, because the feeling was real, some part of you accepts this as currency. Some part of you says, I felt the guilt, therefore I am moving forward. But you are not moving forward. You are standing completely still and feeling bad about it. This is the loop, the Nafs loop, not a loop of failure. Failure would be simpler. This is a loop of acknowledged failure that goes nowhere. You fail. You notice. You feel guilty. The guilt feels like action. Nothing changes. You fail again. You feel guilty again. The guilt feels like action again. Nothing changes. Again, until the guilt itself becomes a habit, until feeling bad about yourself becomes your response to yourself. Not because it helps, but because it is familiar, because the loop runs so smoothly now that you barely notice it is a loop at all. And meanwhile, the thing you wanted to change, still unchanged. Sit with this. The emotion of guilt in isolation without action following it becomes a protection mechanism. It protects you from the far more uncomfortable truth that you are choosing not to change, not consciously, not deliberately, but choosing nonetheless in the way you choose everything, through your attention, your energy, and what you allow yourself to do or not do in a given moment. The guilt says you want to change, you are trying, you care, and all of these things feel true. Some of them may even be true, but none of them are leading anywhere, because feeling that you want to change is not the same as changing, because caring is perhaps the most dangerous illusion of all. You can care deeply about something and still do absolutely nothing about it if the caring remains only in emotion and never descends into action. The Nafs has discovered that as long as you are in the guilt loop, you are not in the change loop. As long as you are feeling bad about not changing, you are not doing the work of changing. The Nafs prefers the guilt loop because the guilt loop is familiar, because it requires nothing beyond the emotion itself. The Nafs, left ungoverned, will optimize for comfort while giving you the illusion of depth. And you have been inside this illusion for a long time. Now let us go one level deeper, because the Nafs does not work alone. It operates through the Qalb, the heart. And the heart is where things get complicated. The Qalb in Islamic tradition is not merely an organ that pumps blood. It is the center of the human being, the seat of perception, of moral awareness, of spiritual receptivity. The heart is what turns toward things, what inclines, what attaches, what loves, and the condition of your heart determines almost everything about how you experience your life. A healthy heart knows what it loves, loves what is real, turns toward what is true even when it is difficult. A healthy heart can feel guilt and let the guilt become movement rather than remaining in feeling. But most hearts in this age, with its floods of noise and distraction and stimulation, are not fully healthy, not diseased, but divided, split, fragmented, turning in several directions at once, caught between what they know and what they want, between what they believe and what they do. This is why the guilt you feel does not lead anywhere, not primarily because your will is weak, but because your heart is divided. When you feel the guilt, you feel it in one part of yourself, the part that knows, the part that wants something better, but in another part, another loyalty is already present, another attachment, another comfort. Something the heart has been quietly, consistently choosing, not dramatically, not in crisis, but in all the small moments, all the ordinary choices, all the ways you spent your attention across the days. The heart does not lie. It will always tell you what it actually loves by what it returns to, not by what it says it loves, not by what it feels guilty about not loving, but by what it returns to again and again, naturally, when no one is watching. And if you look honestly, and this requires genuine courage, you will see what your heart actually loves, not what you believe it should love, not what you tell yourself it loves, but what it actually loves as demonstrated by the evidence of your daily life. This is painful to see because there is a gap. There is almost always a gap between what the heart declares it values and what the heart actually chooses. And that gap, that distance between the declared value and the lived behavior, is where the guilt lives. That is the home of the guilt. The guilt is not a moral problem. The guilt is a signal of internal incoherence. It is telling you that there is a split inside you, that something in you knows and something in you refuses. A divided heart generates tremendous internal friction. Every step forward pulls the half that wants to stay backward. Every good intention meets resistance from within, and you experience this counterpull as weakness. But it is not weakness, it is division. And division is not fixed by trying harder. Division is only fixed by asking honestly which parts of you are pulling in which direction and why, and what they are attached to and what they are afraid of losing. Because underneath every failure to change, there is always something the person does not want to lose. Always. Underneath the habit you hate, the behavior you are ashamed of, the loop you keep returning to, there is something you are getting from it. Something you are not ready to give up. Something the old pattern provides, even as it costs you. Maybe it provides distraction. Maybe the feeling of control in a world that feels chaotic. Maybe a comfort that is easier and faster than the slower, harder comfort of discipline. Maybe it provides an identity, because sometimes who we have been for a long time becomes more familiar than who we want to become. Maybe the guilt itself provides something, the feeling of caring without the cost of changing, a self-image. I am someone who knows their faults, who struggles nobly. That is more comfortable than the simpler, starker truth. Maybe you are afraid of who you would be if you actually changed. Think about that. Really think about it. For some people, the pattern of failing and feeling guilty has become their identity. I am someone who struggles with this. I am someone who wants to be better, but keeps falling. And there is a strange comfort in this identity. It is not a happy identity, but it is a known one. And the Nafs prefers a known suffering to an unknown possibility. The Nafs is not choosing the pattern because it is good. The Nafs is choosing it because it is familiar. And changing, real changing, not the feeling of changing, but the actual structural shift in how you live, is, for the Nafs, a form of death. The death of the familiar self. And even when the familiar self is something you know causes harm, the Nafs will resist its death. And so you stay. And so the guilt comes. And the loop keeps running. Now, we need to talk about the Ruh. The Ruh, the spirit, is different from both the Nafs and the Qalb. The Nafs is active, loud, pulling, demanding. The Qalb is responsive, inclined, turned, but the Ruh is quiet. The Ruh is still. It does not argue with you. It does not compete with the Nafs for your attention. It simply exists. It simply waits. It waits in the way that deep water waits, not urgently, not dramatically, but with an inexhaustible patience the surface can never quite touch. The Ruh is what makes you capable of more than the Nafs wants for you. It is the part of you that was breathed into you by something infinitely beyond you, and it carries a memory, not a conscious memory, not something you can retrieve and examine, but a deep knowing, a memory of something higher, something cleaner, something the surface life of habits and guilt loops never fully satisfies. This is why you feel the dissatisfaction. This is why, even after you get what you wanted, the thing you thought would make you feel complete, there is, underneath the satisfaction, a quiet emptiness. a sense that something is still missing, a sense that there is still something more somewhere that you have not yet reached. That feeling is the Ruh speaking. The Ruh is not interested in the Nafs loop. It is waiting for something that requires a genuine turning. Not a feeling of turning, but an actual reorientation of the self at the level of what you love, what you attend to, what you give your daily life to. And the tragedy of the guilt loop is that it is so emotionally convincing that it functions as a substitute for the real turning the Ruh is waiting for. You feel the guilt, and the guilt feels like depth, feels like seriousness, and this feeling quiets the Ruh's signal for a while. Not permanently, but long enough for the loop to complete itself and begin again. The Ruh is patient. It will wait. But the longer it waits, the more distant its signal becomes, and the more easily it is mistaken for silence. And that growing distance, that is what produces the feeling you have sometimes that something is off, but you cannot explain it. That vague wrongness, that sense that your life is happening slightly outside of you, that you are watching yourself move through days without fully inhabiting them. That is the consequence of living primarily in the Nafs loop, while the Ruh's quiet call goes chronically unheard. You feel it. You have felt it. You just did not have a name for it. Now you do. Let us now talk about the mechanism of actual change, not advice. I want to show you the mechanism, show you how real change actually happens at the level of the Nafs and the Qalb, so that you can see clearly what it requires. Real change, the kind rooted in a genuine shift of the inner life, begins not with guilt, but with something much rarer. It begins with seeing, not seeing your behavior. You already see your behavior. You have been seeing it for months, maybe years. You see it clearly enough to feel guilty about it regularly. What you have not done is see the system. See the loop as a loop. See that the guilt is part of the system and not a solution to it. See the division in the heart the guilt is pointing to. See what old pattern is providing that you are not ready to live without. That kind of seeing requires you to stop being the person who is nobly struggling and start being the person who is honestly examining. Those are different postures. The struggling posture generates emotion. The examining posture generates clarity and emotion. In the absence of clarity is just sensation. The tradition speaks of muhasabah, self-accounting, not self-flagellation, not the ritual of feeling terrible about yourself and calling it depth. Accounting. Clear-eyed examination. A merchant counts what is in the ledger not because counting hurts, but because accurate numbers are necessary for good decisions. Real muhasabah goes one level deeper than listing failures. It asks not only what did I fail at, but why? Not only what habit do I want to break, but what is this habit protecting me from? What has the doing wrong been doing for me? What fear has it been managing? When you find the real answer, the one that makes you slightly uncomfortable to admit, you have found the beginning of the actual work, not the guilt, not the emotion, the work. And then, only then, does the question of action become meaningful. Because action taken without this clarity will almost always fail. Not because you lack willpower, but because you are trying to change a behavior without addressing the root the behavior is growing from. You are cutting a branch while the root system remains intact. The branch grows back. It always grows back. The Nafs cannot be subdued by fighting it directly. Fighting the nafs head-on is like trying to hold down the surface of a river. The river keeps moving. You cannot stop desire by force of will alone. What actually moves the nafs is not combat, but transformation. Not suppression, but redirection. The language used is tarbiyah, nurturing, cultivation, training. The nafs is not meant to be destroyed. It is meant to be shaped, brought gradually and honestly out from the level where it commands toward comfort, upward toward something different. But tarbiyah is not fast, and it is not emotional. It is structural. It is consistent. It is the kind of change that happens not in a moment of feeling, but in the accumulation of days, not in the dramatic resolution, but in the ordinary discipline, not in the guilt, but in the patient, unspectacular doing of what you know you need to do, day after day, without waiting for the feeling to arrive first. This is the crucial reversal most people never make. They wait for the feeling before the action. They wait to feel motivated before they act. They wait for the guilt to become strong enough that it transforms naturally into change. But feelings follow action, not the other way around. The sincerity you are waiting to feel before you begin, you will find it in the beginning. The motivation you want before you start, it arrives in the starting. Action first, feeling second, not because feeling doesn't matter, but because feeling without action is the nafs loop. And the nafs loop will run forever if you keep waiting for the feeling to arrive fully formed. Now, I want to speak specifically about ibadah, about worship, because for people who come from a tradition where worship is meant to be the axis of the life, the guilt loop takes on a particular texture. You know the Salah is there waiting. You know the Quran is there waiting, and you feel drawn to these things, genuinely drawn. A real longing for the cleanness they provide, a real awareness that when you are in them, your life feels more coherent, more aligned. And then you don't do them, or you do them incompletely, or you do them and are entirely elsewhere in your mind. And then the guilt arrives, carrying the weight of what feels like abandoning something sacred, not just a habit, a relationship. And so you feel it deeply. You say, I will do better. And sometimes you do for a stretch of days, and something opens in you during those days that you remember and treasure. And then life moves in, and the habit breaks, and the guilt returns. And I want to say something about this that may be harder to hear than anything else tonight. The guilt you feel about your worship, if it remains only guilt, if it becomes itself a ritual, a regular feature of your inner landscape, this guilt is not piety. Piety is not the feeling of remorse. Piety is the turning, and a turning that keeps beginning and never completing, that keeps producing the emotion of repentance without the structure of return. This is not the nafs being defeated. This is the nafs using the language of piety to stay comfortable. The nafs is intelligent. It knows you are a person who cares about these things, so it does not resist them by making you feel nothing. It resists them by making you feel the right things at the wrong times, without the follow-through that would actually threaten its comfort. The nafs will let you feel the emotion of Tawbah, repentance, as long as the Tawbah remains emotional, as long as it is a feeling and not a structural change in how you live. Real Tawbah is not primarily an emotion. It is a decision made in clarity rather than feeling, or to turn from the direction you are facing and begin walking. And walking looks boring compared to feeling. Walking is just You stood up and you took a step and you took another step. Not dramatically, not in the middle of the night when the guilt was most intense, but in the ordinary morning when nothing felt particularly significant, when you were not in any special emotional state, when the nafs did not feel conquered so much as gently, persistently redirected. This is Tawbah, the actual kind. The emotion can come. The remorse can be real, but the emotion must be the beginning of something, not the end of it. The emotion must open a door, not become a room you live in. The sign of real repentance is that the person does not return to the thing they repented of, not because they never feel the pull toward it, but because the structure of their life has changed in ways that no longer accommodate it, because they have addressed honestly and specifically the conditions that made the behavior possible and changed those conditions deliberately, not through dramatic willpower, through architecture, what you do in the first hour after you wake, who you speak to and what you speak about, what you allow into your attention, how you structure the time between Fajr and the day beginning, how you end the day, what you do in the small gaps between obligations. These are not dramatic things, but they are the architecture, and the architecture determines almost everything about who you actually are, as opposed to who you feel like in a state of intense emotion. The guilt loop happens in emotion. Change happens in architecture. Oh, this is why the guilt loop is so persistent and so useless. It visits you in the emotional space and produces nothing because nothing in the architecture ever changes. The conditions that made the behavior possible remain. The triggers remain. The rewards remain. And so the behavior returns, and the guilt returns, and the loop continues. If you want to actually break the loop, not feel like you are breaking it, not have an intense emotional moment that you call breaking it, you have to sit down without drama and without guilt and look at the actual structure of your actual days. Ask, where, specifically, does the old pattern have room to exist? What makes it easy? What makes the alternative hard? And then change those things, not all at once, not dramatically. One thing, a specific thing, something small enough to actually do and real enough to actually matter. Not a resolution, a change in structure. The Nafs can resist a resolution. The Nafs has been resisting your resolutions for years. But the Nafs cannot resist an environment that has been changed. When the trigger is removed, the behavior loses its access point. When the architecture shifts, the Nafs shifts with it. Not because the Nafs has been conquered, but because the Nafs, following always the path of least resistance, finds that the path of least resistance now leads somewhere different. Ibn al-Qayyim understood this centuries ago. The self is not primarily moved by will. It is moved by environment, by habit, by the accumulation of small choices made in ordinary moments. Change the environment, change the habit. The self follows. The hardest part is not the dramatic moments. It is the ordinary ones. The Tuesday afternoon when nothing is wrong and nothing is pressing, and the default is available and easy, and the alternative requires a small, unspectacular effort. These moments are where change is actually made or lost, not in the moments of intense remorse. The Nafs loop lives in the dramatic moments. Real change lives in the Tuesday afternoons. One more thing before the end. The thing that makes the guilt loop most powerful, more powerful than its emotional intensity, is its relationship with Rahmah, mercy. The mercy of Allah is vast. You know this. And the knowledge of this mercy, which should be liberating, can become, in the hands of an ungoverned nafs, a rationalization. The loop goes like this: I failed again. I feel guilty. I know Allah is merciful. I will repent. I am forgiven. I will do better. And then the next time temptation arrives, I will not resist too hard because I know I can repent afterward. The door opens, the pattern happens, the guilt comes, the mercy is invoked, the loop runs again. This is not invoking mercy. This is using the idea of mercy as cover for a decision that was already made. The nafs can make the invocation of divine mercy feel like deep faith when it is actually a bypass mechanism. Real reliance on mercy is what you turn to after genuine effort, after a real attempt, after you have brought what you actually have and it was still not enough. Real mercy covers the genuine shortfall. The nafs loop is not a genuine shortfall. It is a manufactured shortfall, a controlled failure. A failure the nafs planned from the beginning, knowing the mercy would cover it. You know the difference. In the deepest part of yourself, the part that cannot lie to itself even when it desperately wants to, you know the difference between remorse that follows a genuine effort that fell short and remorse that follows a choice you made willingly and then covered with emotion. The difference lives in the moment before the behavior, not after it. In the moment of choice, there is always a window. Sometimes small, sometimes very small, but always present, where something in you knows what is about to happen and has a genuine option. What happens in that window is the true story of the self. Everything after it, the guilt, the remorse, the resolution, is a response to that window, but the window itself is where the real life is. Begin to notice the window, not to shame yourself about what happens in it, but to see it, to actually locate it in time, to find the specific moment where the choice actually lives. Because once you can see it, once you can stand inside it with real awareness rather than rushing past it toward the familiar pattern, something begins to shift. Not dramatically, not immediately, but something shifts. The window begins to feel like an actual window, a real opening, not a checkpoint you pass through on the way to the predetermined conclusion. A real moment where more than one thing is genuinely possible. And in that moment, with the nafs pulling toward comfort, with the Qalb watching, with the ruh waiting quietly in the background, you can choose, not because you are strong, not because the guilt finally became powerful enough, but because you saw clearly. Because the seeing, the real, honest, unflinching seeing of the loop and the mechanism and the window and the choice is what the tradition calls basira, inner sight. And inner sight, once genuinely opened, cannot be fully closed again. You see differently after you have seen, and the seeing is where the change begins, not where it ends. Begins. What comes after the seeing is still work, still architecture, still the ordinary discipline of Tuesday afternoons, still the long, unspectacular work of turning the Qalb toward what it actually wants to love, rather than what it has grown comfortable loving. Still, all of that, but it begins with the seeing. And tonight, in this quiet, in this late hour, in this strange, uncomfortable clarity, something has been seen. Not everything, not the end of the loop, not the completion of the work, not the cathartic conclusion that would let you feel finished and go to sleep feeling changed. None of that. just a small, specific, undeniable thing. The guilt was never the solution. It was part of the system, and you are no longer entirely inside the system. You are standing slightly outside it, looking at it, seeing it run, watching the loop complete itself, and knowing that it is a loop. That is not motivation. That is not advice. That is clarity. And clarity, once it arrives, changes the texture of everything that comes after it. Not because clarity is enough. It is not enough. But because clarity is first. Before the architecture can change, you must see the architecture. Before the window can be inhabited, you must find it. Before the Nafs can be gently, honestly, persistently shaped toward something better, you must stop mistaking its most sophisticated defense mechanism for spiritual depth. The guilt was not depth. The guilt was the lock. And now, quietly, without drama, without any feeling of triumph, because there is nothing yet to triumph over, the lock is visible. That is not the end, but it is not nothing. It is the beginning of something that actually goes somewhere.